In 1992, Wolfenstein 3D helped shepherd in a new approach to video games. No longer were games defined by the millimeter-sized slot in the side of the cabinet that had a knack for eating up your weekly allowance. Instead, video games have infiltrated the home, right on your computer or television. This new perspective to what was previously considered child's play allowed developers to completely change the way they approached designing a video game. Enter then the first-person shooter, a dramatic far cry from the top-down shoot-'em-ups that many arcades housed. While Wolfenstein may have been the first mainstream first-person shooter, id Software can be considered the first mainstream first-person shooter developers, credited for games such as Doom and Quake, as well as Wolfenstein. John Carmack and his ragtag team of alternative thinkers decided enough was enough for video games being E-rated. These games were violent, and I mean violent. Well, for their time they were. It may not seem so now, but for every person that these themes and images excited, two more were left disgusted. And yet, they persisted. And more importantly, other developers took note. id didn't create violence in video games, but they certainly made three-dimensional slaughter trendy. And that train never stopped. A majority of games since have incorporated violence in such obvious ways that it has become an expectation for the medium. Games that don't include stabbing or shooting can be remembered for that very omission. id's steadfast obsession with violence in video games helped embolden other developers to create games about subjects that were previously too taboo or inappropriate to create before. You see, this is the importance of developers like this, and especially for the medium of video games. Video games, sort of like novels, can create worlds and interactive set pieces that films just simply cannot. Today, the only barrier to making something happen on a PlayStation is that of the imagination. With this, of course, comes controversy. But it is a net positive, and if we operate under the assumption that video games are art, many expressions of artistic prowess simply would not have been possible without breaking through previously held beliefs of what is appropriate. What then is video games' obsession with the inner fluids of man? Why do games encourage you to shoot waves and waves of enemies with no remorse? How is this in any way artistic? That's not an easy question to answer, maybe impossible. One step towards finding common ground on the subject is analyzing a game that wields violence like an SS officer's coat. It's obvious, defining, and all-encompassing. Enter then MachineGames' 2014 addition to the franchise, Wolfenstein: The New Order. The New Order is an absurdly good game, and I believe it is misleadingly so. Before I start, let's get one thing clear. The New Order is a game about killing as many Nazis as one can imagine. It's about scalping Nazis, shooting Nazis, blowing up Nazis, stabbing Nazis. This game's goal is very clear. Know that it also comes at a time, and not unjustifiably so, of fear and terror of fascistic and draconian people. One thing we will find is that the wider cultural context of this game was not lost on the developers, nor should it be on you. What this doesn't mean, however, is that the game can't merit philosophical discussion or yield deep analysis. I think most should play this game. I understand, though, some turn to these kind of videos in order to understand a game or its cultural significance without actually putting the time or the money in. This is why I prefer to be thorough. I think this title has a lot to be discovered and unpacked, but it's important you, the viewer, get an idea of the gameplay and story elements first. Let's break down that story and gameplay here. This is your official spoiler warning. I want to go through the game here and discuss in-depth the level design, characters, themes, and story elements that I think make Wolfenstein so great. This is, above all, an analysis of the game. Understanding the role of violence in video games will be supplementary. I played through the game twice, for reasons we will get into. My first playthrough was on the hardest difficulty, Uber. My second on the easiest. I collected every treasure, record, and diary. I found all the codex entries and solved them. I completed every Steam achievement. For all intents and purposes, I have completed this game 100%. At the core of Wolfenstein is its first-person shooter roots, something that is so clearly, in the best way possible, taken from the generations prior to it. Whether it's the fact that there are secret rooms behind paintings, or just the simple throwback to static health, the New Order honestly filled me with joy just in how much it reminded me of being 12 and playing Quake campaigns. So let's break this down, because I understand just saying that the New Order's gameplay is fun and nostalgic may not be enough. The first approach is the level design. The New Order's strength isn't necessarily in player choice, but more player expression. I know this sounds really pretentious, but hear me out. Player choice in combat is something you may find in a sandbox game like Skyrim or Grand Theft Auto. You can arm yourself with weapons of your choice, approach the battle from the sky, or stealthily from the ground. You can attribute skill points to stealth-heavy skills, or maybe you want to tank damage. Regardless, these are games with an extraordinary amount of ways to approach certain combat encounters. Don't think I think this is a bad thing, and certainly don't think that I think that it's the preferable option. Some games do it well, others end up ruining the experience by making it too open-ended. Wolfenstein, on the other hand, chooses to operate under player expression. This is to say that the game trims itself down to some very pure and easy-to-understand systems, then places you in a carefully crafted, quasi-realistic combat arena. Sure, you have player choice in the sense that there's both stealth options and dual-wielding shotgun options, but most often it's more about making you feel badass and in control, rather than a series of manipulating numbers. The best way I can condense this distinction is by saying that player choice happens before the conflict, whereas player expression happens during. By not allowing the player to level up or enter rooms from different ways, or adding helicopters that are an open world, the only thing different between your encounter with a combat arena and mine is how we express ourselves using the same systems. We are using the same systems, same layout, but we end up with different results and stories. I may have knifed the first commander and botched the second, causing me to take cover and have to fight my way back to safety. You may have entered the room and rushed the commanders down with shotguns before they could even call reinforcements. These are both expressions of our approach to the given combat scenario. We entered the room in the same place with the same equipment. I know this is a lot. If you're interested in a game study about this topic, I'd love to. If you guys are interested, let me know. So if we understand that the game's strength is in its ability to make you, the player, perform the actions of BJ Blazkowicz, then what does that have to do with the level design? I mentioned this earlier, but if you haven't noticed from the gameplay, this is not a game grounded in realism. Therefore, it became clear to the developers that the gameplay was far more important than creating realistic environments. You fight on the moon at one point. The levels are created under this philosophy, where you are not given real areas to fight through, but instead combat arenas that are tailor-made to provide the most player expression. In an absolute shameless throwback to the games that birthed the first-person shooter genre, the gameplay loop generally is as follows. You run through an atmospheric corridor filled with enemies. There are secrets to be found in every nook and cranny. These act as connectors to what is the combat arenas mentioned earlier. Normally, they will be a relatively open area with multiple levels, as well as multiple places to approach each commander. The commanders are essentially walking alarm stations. If they are alerted to your presence, they will call for reinforcements and will continue to do so until you murder them. An ideal run through one of these areas would be to stealthily take out both of the commanders, leaving the rest of the grunts to be killed by you in whatever way you see fit. On Uber difficulty, this becomes a necessity sometimes, as an overwhelming amount of enemies will put you in the dirt fast. There are some cinematic set pieces scattered throughout, as well as some boss fights. Most of these are honestly the weaker parts of the game, as they cower back into elements of the more contemporary shooters that don't give you as many opportunities for expression. So I should ask, does the Odyssey matter? How does the game benefit from this gameplay loop of set piece into corridor, into arena, into corridor, into boss fight? Why the linearity? Again, I think the answer lies in polish. The game oozes polish. Whether it's in the environmental storytelling that can be found in troop quarters or concentration camp secret rooms, there's a meticulous and careful approach to not just the arena's level design, but the stories told in between those arenas. You are meant to experience the journey in the New Order. That is why the Odyssey matters. Almost every ounce of design decisions encourage the player to think about what is going on in the world, to question the killing. It's the contrast that gives context. But yeah, at its core, Wolfenstein The New Order is a linear title. It's linear in the sense that there is no open world or not any wide branching paths. It's linear in the sense that it's mission-based, and each mission is a series of these corridors and arenas mentioned earlier. Linearity is, however, not a bad thing, especially when it exists so that the levels can be polished. Each level in New Order puts you on a path that has diversions, sure, but has a consistent and logical amount of crescendos and climaxes, nooks and crannies, as well as quiet time and double shotgun time. As we go through the game, we'll stop to talk about where the level design succeeds and fails, as well as the story. Before we go chronologically through the story, let's set the stage a bit. The New Order is absolutely an alternate timeline story. Considering the game starts you in 1946, a year after the war in Europe has ended, This is obviously not a reflection of reality. You are at war with Nazi Germany still, and they are winning. You play as William Joseph Blaskowitz, or Blaskovich, or who we and many others call BJ Blazkowicz. It's important to note that Wolfenstein has decades worth of canon and retconning. For this video, I will reiterate I am pretty much examining the story in the vacuum of this game. I understand a prequel has come out after this title, but I'm yet to play that. That being said, BJ is an extraordinarily interesting character to me. He is such to me almost entirely in how MachineGames was able to turn someone so ordinary into someone so extraordinary. In terms of character design, BJ is everything video game developers buried themselves into in the mid-2000s and early 2010s, and even today. He's a white, jarhead male who speaks in a low, raspy voice. If you weren't paying attention, that describes every action protagonist in a modern shooter for the last decade. It's how MachineGames grabs hold of these stereotypes and twists them that makes BJ so interesting to me. Their desire to humanize Blaskovich creates a very interesting and thought-provoking contrast to the dehumanizing slaughter of SS members. What is interesting, of course, is the statement this is making about identity and ideas. Let me tread lightly here. I don't think you can talk about BJ as a character without talking about this. MachineGames took a lot of risks with this title. That hurts me to say because, to me, it is horribly sad that a video game developer cannot make a video game about blowing up Nazis without receiving blowback from many places. Many gamers believe that this game is, and I'm just the messenger here, such things as white genocide, SJW propaganda, caving to liberal media. This blows my mind. One would think that if there's one thing we can all agree on, politics aside, it would be exploding Nazis. This should be the great unifier. The game goes out of its way to remind you that these are the least human people in the world. Not human at all, frankly. And we'll cover this more in the story. So what does this have to do with BJ and identity in particular? Well, some of the alt-Rikers that argue this game is SJW propaganda could not be missing the point more. If this wasn't already obvious by their anime profile picture, these people are far more sensitive than the snowflakes they criticize. The character you play as, the one annihilating hordes of Nazis, is the most Aryan-looking dude out there. He's in Fox News's wet dream, unapologetically American, hardworking, and brave. MachineGames is deliberately taking a logical approach here and showing that it's the ideas that are bad. It has nothing to do with the identity of the Nazis. By making you the player as Aryan as can be and still knowing that these individuals need to be stopped, it condenses the problem to what it truly is. An authoritarian group of mentally ill supremacists who need to be taken out. It makes the problem about ideas, about objectively showing that despite the races being equal, both BJ and you, the player, still realize that what you are fighting is monstrous and evil. All races should have no issue coming together in the fight to take out Nazis. Why should we, the player? Ideologically, BJ is a freedom-loving, anti-fascist, red-blooded American. Physically, he is the Nazis' perfect specimen. This design is intentional to get you to realize that the problems here, the people you are killing, go so much deeper than just race or identity. It's an ideological delusion, a mental illness framed in racial superiority. It's a brilliant way of showing the absurdity of the Nazis' logical fallacy. And I am not saying that this game or the subject of Nazis has nothing to do with race. Goodness, I'm not saying that. That topic, and specifically its relevance to today, goes so much further than anything I could say here. I'm just explaining rhetorically what MachineGames was doing with their design of BJ. Having BJ look like the January model in Hitler's fireman's calendar shows the sheer, unequivocal stupidity in sympathizing with these monsters. And let me restate myself. There are those that believe this game promotes an anti-white narrative. I realize I may have lost some of you here. I would love to further discuss this in the comments, but it plays an enormous role in understanding the game's story and characters. In my form of video game critique, which I understand is different than many who are in this space on YouTube, the cultural impact is entirely important to understanding the context and motivation for the game's story. This is not me adding politics into my videos. Actually, here's a good litmus test to knowing if you are sane or not. If you think the phrase, shooting Nazis in a video game is not a form of anti-white rhetoric, is a form of injecting politics, you are not sane. No, that's not politics, that's common sense. Moving on. BJ's confidant and lover is named Anya Oliva? A Polish woman who acts as your lifesaver and partner in Nazi killing for a lot of the game. At the Resistance base, there's your old friend from the previous games, I assume, Caroline Becker. She's bound to a wheelchair since she received a bullet to the spinal cord. Joining her will be a diverse cast of characters in which there is no way this video could do justice. Listen carefully, I'll mention them later, but I won't bore you with details on all of them. There's Klaus, a former Nazi, and his adopted son of sorts, Max Haas, a mentally disabled victim of Nazi doctors. Joining later in the game is the religious scientist Set Roth, and depending on the timeline, I know we'll get to that, you are either met with Tekla, an eccentric math magician, or Jay, a rock music loving stick-it-to-the-man hippie who is absolutely supposed to be Jimi Hendrix. Your other important squad mate depends on a decision you make very early in the game. Your enemies consist of the ever-beautiful Frau Ingo, a lieutenant colonel of the SS, a position she was promoted to based on her ruthless killing and loyalty to the Nazis. She is almost always flanked by her boy toy, Booby, who deserves no further explanation. Finally, the main antagonist of the New Order is General Wilhelm Deathshead Strauss, general of the Nazi military. He has his own fortress. He's pretty important. The interesting thing I liked about this character is that he is much more motivated by the science and biology behind his evil Nazi ways. It's an important addition to the narrative about a topic as sickening and difficult as the Nazis. As militaristic as they were also brilliant, containing some of the brightest scientific minds in the world. Death's Head is an incredibly cerebral villain. The game itself takes place in an alternate reality that starts in 1946 but mainly takes place in the 60s. Aesthetically and thematically, it's a postmodern world that takes from other alternate reality works like Philip Dick's The Man in High Castle. The world you find yourself is monolithic and all-encompassing. The Nazis have infiltrated the entirety of Europe, both in military and culture. Buildings are completely stone structures towering above all. This Orwellian state has sprouted temples of authoritarianism everywhere, as if to remind you, the player, the sheer scale of obstacle that is required to even make a dent in the Nazis' effort. The world design in general is deflating. It's gray, concrete, and suffocating. I am proud of you for making it this far if you have. I will reiterate I am new to this kind of video. This is my second time doing it, and I always try to mention this. To me, these videos are both a book report and a critical analysis. They are long for a reason. They can be watched by those who have never played the game, and they can learn about the game as close to as much as if they've played it. I also like to see this as a book club, so I encourage you to share your thoughts. Let's hop into the story. The New Order begins with you on a plane headed towards Deathhead's lair. The dialogue leads you to believe that this is the Allies' last push towards winning the war in 1946. Failure would spell disaster for the Allies' effort in Europe. Your first friend you meet is Fergus Reed, a Brit who finds himself almost crashing his plane just before hopping mid-flight to another plane to help a pilot with you. The game makes it very clear that it is not a game to be taken seriously. On the other plane, you meet Private Wyatt of the 109th Airborne, a green boy who when first met is in such shock only a couple slaps from BJ can bring him back to reality. The plane crashes and you are introduced to Death's Head compound, as well as the types of enemies you will encounter in the game. Again, this game's aesthetic is absolutely a vehicle of the theme. Your enemies are faceless, shrouded in mechanical garb. Every enemy you fight reminds you of the bigger enemy you fight, a mechanical, industrial, overwhelming force of industry that consumes everything in its path. The game starts you fighting jet planes, something very new to 1946, to a giant mechanical dog, a bastardization of anything remotely resembling what it once was. The game is telling you that this is what they are willing to do, that this is what everyone will look like if we don't succeed. You do not succeed. You are captured by Deathshead, and he orders you to choose between Wyatt and Fergus for his operating table. Naturally, on my first go, I did not choose. I remained silent. I was killed. After reloading, I chose Wyatt, although I played through the game again in its entirety after picking Fergus as well. The game calls these two choices the timelines. Small things are different throughout, like some of the home-based content and characters, as well as the ending. Most, though, is exactly the same. You escape with the survivor of your choosing, not before experiencing absolutely devastating injury from the explosion. Your skull now houses a couple inches of shrapnel. A cinematic passage showing that you are in what appears to be a hospital. No, it's more of a mental hospital. You are visited by a young lady and her family. Every once in a while, SS troopers arrive and take away patients whose only use could be for the work camps. Finally, as you are coming back to reality a bit, a couple SS troops come in to shut down the whole operation. You break out and find Anya. You escape back to her parents' house. Being the fugitives you are, you must be secretive. Along the way, you encounter a Nazi officer and kill him, to which Anya doesn't seem to blink an eye. In the backseat of her car, you encounter another Nazi officer. You capture him and put him in the basement of Anya's parents' house. At dinner, the big reveal happens. Okay, I understand this may not seem like a big reveal to those who knew about the game. I knew nothing, never played the games before, never took much interest in the game before this. I saw it on Steam for sale, it looked cool, booted it up, and here we go.
It's 1960.
1960?
Yes. You've stayed with us for 14 years. It's 1960.
I have to find a way to contact the U.S. military. I gotta find my unit, let them know I'm alive and ready for duty.
There's no more war.
It's over. No more military. No.
The war ain't over. Look at all these Nazis walking around.
They won.
It's over. The Nazis rule the world now. They are everywhere. Everywhere.
What about the U.S.?
The USA, they, what's the word? Poddacie.
Surrender.
They surrendered.
Because of... Boo!
Atom bomb.
They surrendered 12 years ago when Nazi atom bombed their country.
Yes.
So yeah, it's 1960 and the Nazis have completely won the war. They are on the verge of world domination as a result of the atomic bomb going off in the States. You go down and torture the officer for information, and absolutely as an outlet for BJ's frustration and anger. The Nazi tells you where the prisoners of the resistance are, and you set out on your way. You single-handedly clear out many Nazi checkpoints and go onto a train headed straight for Berlin. Throughout the game, you get a voyeuristic into BJ's mental state and stream of consciousness. When he isn't lamenting the dead, he's thinking of Anya. He is incredibly grateful for her love and care when he was sick. On a train to Berlin, you encounter two obviously high-ranking German officers, Frau Engel and her boy toy Booby. She stops you and orders you to sit with her. A cool sequence occurs here, and I don't know, this is one of those moments in video games that reminded me why this medium is so cool. Can I play it for you? I'll just play it for you.
Augenblick mal. Lassen Sie sich mal ansehen. Ja. Sehr schöne arische Züge. Findest du nicht auch, Bobby?
Ja, mir gefallen seine Augen.
Bitte, setzen Sie sich. Entschuldigen Sie mein Benehmen. Ich bin Obersturmbannführer Engel. Und das ist mein liebreizender Begleiter. Das bist du doch, Bobby.
Was soll das, mein Schatz, ey?
Ich möchte Sie einem Test unterziehen. Damit lassen sich Spuren unreinen Blutes, die in den Adern einer Person fließen, feststellen. Ich bin mir sicher, dass Sie diesen Test mit Leichtigkeit bestehen werden. Und wenn nicht, dann werde ich Sie erschießen. Haben Sie das verstanden? Das ist nur ein Test! Aber antworten Sie ehrlich. Wenn Sie nach der Waffe greifen sollten, sind Sie tot. Noch bevor Sie Ihre Entscheidung bereuen werden. Gut.
The test she gives you ends up being completely irrelevant. She notes that she knew you were pure the second she saw you, and how she can notice impure blood the second she sees it. Note how in this sequence the game still gives you control. I tried to walk the opposite way in an attempt to avoid the two, and was told the exit was closed. I knew I had to cross them, so I forced BJ's head down to stare at the coffee as to avoid eye contact. The coffee responded and shifted with the weight of my movements. It was really cool. You go back to your cabin and you and Anya wrestle without any clothes on. I won't be showing that. You make it to Berlin and hop on a prisoner transport all the way to Eisenwald prison. Kill a bunch of Nazis and eventually you meet your good friend Fergus or Wyatt, depending on your choice earlier in the game. He's pretty happy to see you. You break out of the prison and manage to find your way to the Resistance headquarters placed right under the Nazi headquarters. They argue it's the last place they would look, but holy crap does that seem counterproductive. Again, though, it's hard to point out logical fallacies in a game like this. You meet all the characters I mentioned earlier and are given a break from the linearity of the main story missions to walk around the HQ and explore. I like these parts. I didn't really love them as they usually dissolve to fetch quests, but I like them in practice. I also partook in some old school Wolfenstein on the third floor as well. The rest of the game has you performing actions in order to get closer and closer to the heart of the Nazi cause. You end up finding out that the way in which the Nazis have created such enormous sprawling structures in such a short time is through something called Uber Concrete, a specialized version of cement that is extraordinarily strong. You learn there is someone that is meddling in the production of this concrete and track him to a camp in Bellica, a forced labor camp that is obviously derivative of some of the camps that peppered Poland and Germany in the 40s. This whole chapter is difficult. It approaches the subject with the same sort of tenacity and aggression that the game approaches everything with, so one should ask themselves how they would rather have it. Should MachineGames hold back with topics like this and inconsistently approach different evils from the war? Alternatively, should MachineGames fully commit to not hiding or censoring anything from these subjects so as to be consistent in their approach? I don't know if that's for me to decide. Personally, I think they handled it well and kept the gratuitous violence to a minimum while still including important themes such as the living conditions, the tattooing of identification numbers, and the horrendous experimentation on the living and the dead. You find who it is you have been looking for and realize he is deeply spiritual and an intelligent inventor named Set Roth. You manage to break out with Set Roth and also inflict massive damage to Frau Ingel's face just before exploding your way out on a hacked mech. You'll learn there's much more to this world than just the alternate history. There's a supernatural side as well, one that Set Roth has a very good chance of accessing. In order to do so, though, you need a German U-boat to access the Deathshead vault. A couple of missions go by and you find yourself away onto the U-boat. You commandeer that U-boat and take it to the Deathshead vault. You find that these people, whoever they were capable of creating super weapons beyond our imagination, ones that could turn the tide for the resistance. So the plan now is to get a hold of a nuclear bomb, sneak into Deathshead compound with it, the U-boat, and the Deathshead weapons, and blow it to Kingdom Come. In order to do so, though, you need the nuclear decryption keys located on the moon. Yeah, you heard that right. You get a hold of a chief scientist identification number and launch yourself to the moon on a Nazi transport. I thought the moon mission was one of the best, actually. It has the most complete collection of different gameplay types, including a walk around the crust of the moon, complete with gravity shifts. It's a shame this part was so short, to be honest. You never do something like this again. You get a hold of the decryption key and manage to launch yourself back to Earth. You are William Joseph Blaskovich, after all. You kill a bunch of Nazis back on Earth, take down a giant Nazi war machine, and after all that, realize that the Berlin resistance base has been assaulted by Deathshead's own guard. Anya has been taken. Being in love with Anya as you are at this point in the game, you decide it is necessary to start the final attack now. The game does excellently in the fact that you are returning to the same place in which you suffered your catastrophic injuries 14 years earlier. You fight through the compound, use the supernatural technology to breach the walls, and murder a ton of Nazis. As you approach the end, however, you are ambushed by none other than Booby, the pretentious Nazi lover boy. He shows you off to Frau Ingel, only for BJ to show off his incredible strength. Eventually, you encounter your resistance friends, including Anya. I just love how Anya has managed to break herself out here. She's not a princess in a castle you have to save. She doesn't even stick around with you long. She knows she has her part to do, and the BJ has his part to do. There's so much trust, not that either of them will live, but that she knows what is most important to BJ, even if that does mean his life. I especially like this exchange.
We'll get you out of there. We'll go somewhere. I believe there are still places on this earth where people can go and live happy.
I believe so too. Not for me and for you.
Now the stage is set. You, the player, and BJ know there is one last thing to do. You are bruised, battered, and beaten, but you have not found Deathshead yet. He knows it, and you know it. This was so gnarly for me. It just, you end up finding out that the brain of the soldier you choose at the beginning has been preserved. I'm not showing a lot of this because I do feel it absurdly violent, but the harvesting of the noggin is almost completely shown. Deathshead places the brain in a machine and then gives a classic, maybe you're the evil one, speech that literally every villain gives. He frames an important distinction here that we have discussed earlier. The BJ is motivated completely by the killing, whereas at the least, Deathshead is trying to advance humanity scientifically, regardless of the moral consequence. Private Wyatt is now a giant, bloodthirsty mech that you must fight. The fight is easy. You must stun him with the Tesla grenades, dodge his attacks as you have no weapons. After stunning him, you run up to him and try and dismantle the robot. It ends in a heart-wrenching section of him begging you to kill him. You can still hear Wyatt behind the robotic voice. His politeness, his reverence of BJ is awful. What kind of nostalgic first-person shooter would this be if it didn't have an over-the-top boss fight at the end? Enter then Mech's Head Deathshead, a Gatling gun-wielding force to be reckoned with. This fight took me a while to understand. Essentially, you must use the power tool to break through the fence up towards the AA gun, using grenades to stun Deathshead so that he can't hurt you while you're doing this. Instead of firing on Deathshead, you fire at the blimps that are powering his shields. You do this twice, which then opens up Deathshead to be attacked normally. After this phase, he falls through a hole in which you chase him. Phase 2 of this boss fight has you chasing him through an industrial hellscape in which you must combat poor visibility in order to douse him with bullets. I use the word douse because, man, he's absolutely a bullet sponge here. On hardest difficulty, I had a hell of a time with this fight. However, after completing it, I felt very rewarded. I get to knife the horrible man, just right in the face. Just kidding.
A mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning. And her name, Mother of Exiles. Timmy, you're tired. You're bored. Your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these. The homeless. Tempest-tossed.
Again, despite how violent this appears to be, MachineGames obviously has a real commitment to art here. I'm unsure how well known this is, but this reading at the end comes from American poet Emma Lazarus. She wrote it in 1883 in order to raise money for the construction of the Statue of Liberty. That poem's title? The New Colossus. The Wolfenstein game coming out later this year? Wolfenstein, The New Colossus. As a literature lover, it made me so happy to hear this. It makes me even more happy that they are acknowledging Anya for what she really is, just as much of a hero as BJ is. Now, I understand there's a sequel to be released this year, starring BJ. There's also what I understand is a prequel titled The Old Blood. The implication here is that he dies, but he obviously doesn't given the marketing material of the next game. Who knows? I haven't played the prequel, maybe it's explained there. In a vacuum, though, it would appear that he dies at the end of this game. And that is the game. The credits roll. BJ does finish off Deathshead, but at a very big risk and cost. He leaves his pregnant lover behind, as well as a world that is still overwhelmingly controlled by the Nazis. But it was never about that, was it? It was always about the killing. And that's not hyperbole, it was the main goal of the game, the main motivation. The great YouTuber that does this sort of thing as well, Noah Caldwell-Gervais, said something incredibly poignant on this topic. For BJ, it was about killing Nazis. So many Nazis that there are no more Nazis. Just keep killing them until they run out. Did BJ succeed? Did he win in the end? I think in most ways he actually did. He saved Anya, gave her a place where she can be herself and live. He killed Deathshead and blew an irreparable hole in the Nazi war effort. I know he appears to survive, but from his perspective, it was mission complete. The ending reinforces the point of the entire game. It was always about killing the most amount of Nazis you can. The question I have to ask, though, is, was it fun for you? The developers obviously thought it would be fun. The reviews said it was fun. But why was it so fun? I mean, this is one of the most enjoyable single-player experiences I have ever played, and when I try and break down what makes it so excellent, it comes down to how effortless it feels killing Nazis. Maybe you can't tell from the gameplay. Maybe it's a feel thing. Maybe it's BJ Blazkowicz. Regardless, the New Order has excelled in making killing fun. It's your choice as to how you should feel about this. I want to thank you so much for making it this far into the video. If you did, go ahead and tell me so on Twitter or in the comments. That would honestly mean the world to me, and I promise to respond. It makes my day when I hear stuff like that, and it encourages me to make more of these. This is the part of the video where I talk a little about my channel. These videos take a long time to make. I have a job and I'm a full-time student at university. Your likes and subscriptions and comments make it a worthwhile investment of my time. Telling people or sharing these videos makes it an extremely worthwhile investment for me. If you're interested in playing The New Order, it is very cheap on Steam. I want to start including other games at the end of these videos that deal with similar themes and gameplay ideas for these game analyses. For example, I would encourage you to look at games such as Spec Ops: The Line, id's new Crack at Doom 2016, as well as the Metro series. As you may have heard in the previous video, I recorded and finished Nier Automata, and faced very bad tech issues. There won't be a video on that game, but I finished it as well as every achievement. This set me back super far in terms of the channel because I put in a lot of work and time on one of those videos without actually publishing it. I've been catching up ever since. Speaking of which, here's what's in the pipeline, should you care. The next video will be something different and unique to this channel. It's not about video games, but takes the same approach and structure as this video. I hope you at least check it out. Past that, I would like to make one more game study before doing another long analysis. I have two major projects I want to do that aren't game study. Let me know what you like. They are both kind of similar. Here they are. The first is a complete series retrospective and analysis of the Kingdom Hearts games, as they are all available on the PS4 now. An in-depth look at story, themes, and mechanics. It would be the biggest project I've ever done by far. I would do a video for each game, and they would act as chapters to a larger book on the series as a whole. The second is a contemporary Rockstar Games analysis and retrospective, focusing on the open world. This would be similar to the former one mentioned, but it would take a look at Grand Theft Auto 4 and its single-player DLC, Red Dead Redemption, then LA Noire, then Grand Theft Auto 5. This would be arguably an even bigger commitment than the Kingdom Hearts games, but would be approached the same. I frame this as a dichotomy because there are so many good games coming out this fall. I don't know if I would ever be able to do both. I might, but I really don't know. Life comes at you fast. I value your opinion, so let me know. Other games I'm interested in covering are Horizon Zero Dawn, although I don't own it, the two Tomb Raider games, as well as the Uncharted series and The Last of Us, as they are all similar. It'd be cool to do another one where I do those as chapters in a larger book. Or the 4 Borderlands games. I will also probably be doing a podcast form show with someone, my girlfriend, maybe have guests. I don't want it to be just me, so I guess anyone can be on it. About games and philosophy, and the philosophy of games. So please like and comment on this video, and hit subscribe if you like this kind of video. Come by the Twitch stream or follow me on Twitter. Thank you again so much, and have a wonderful night.